If somebody enters the United States and has to attend immigration court, but fails to appear at one of their court hearings, they will likely receive an in absentia deportation order on that day. This deportation order might be fixable. And that's the topic for today's video, where we're going to discuss whether or not somebody should consider reopening their deportation order, what the procedure is, and how they should time it, whether or not now is a good time to apply to reopen an old deportation case. Let's start with the question, why would somebody want to remove or cancel an old deportation order? Let's say you're here without authorization. You're just in the United States and don't have any immigration status, right? Another situation, someone is in the United States without status, but they also have a deportation order. What are the differences between these two situations? Well, first of all, if the person who does not have a deportation order is apprehended by immigration authorities, they might have some recourse. They might be able to say, I have a fear of being returned to my country, and they will not be immediately deported. They'll have to go through a fear interview process to see if they're eligible to apply for asylum or other defenses from deportation. Whereas somebody who has a deportation order, depending on the government policies at the time, may be deported without much recourse available to them. This is very fact specific, but generally speaking, it is much better to be in the US without a deportation order. I have a client who entered the United States in 2002. He didn't receive the hearing notice. Turns out immigration sent his hearing notice for his deportation hearings to the wrong address. In 2002, he received a removal order, an order from an immigration judge ordering him removed from the United States, also known as a deportation order. Now, in this year, 2022, I was able to have that removal order fixed, rescinded. How did I do that? Okay, it's called a motion to reopen. What I did was I asked the government to join in my request to reopen his case. Both my office and the Department of Homeland Security jointly asked the immigration judge to reopen the removal proceedings. The immigration judge reopened the case. The moment the case was reopened, there was no more active deportation. And then we were able to ask the Department of Homeland Security to exercise discretion to determine that this guy is not a deportation priority and to just dismiss the charges. So he went from having a full removal order to the case reopened to the charges dismissed. And now in 2022, he is still in the US without authorization, but he no longer has a deportation order that's constantly looming over his head. Now you might be thinking, okay, great. So I can go from having a deportation order to just being in the US without status. Well, that's not exactly true. In my client's situation, he had no other options available, but that was very specific to his life circumstances. I have many clients who are married to US citizens and who entered the US with a visa, and now they could get a green card, except they have a deportation order. Those situations, although they are very fact specific and this is not broadly applicable, are ripe for motions to reopen. And if I was consulting with somebody who told me those facts about their lives, the first thing I would be screening for would be to see whether now is an appropriate time to ask the government to reopen the deportation case so that he can get his green card. The question becomes, when is a good time to apply for a motion to reopen? That is very complicated, but generally speaking, 2022 seems to be a good time for motions to reopen. There was a policy memorandum issued called the Mayorkas Memo, which may or may not be active by the end of this year, depending on what happens with various federal courts. But as a general proposition, the Department of Homeland Security is much more liberal than they were a few years ago, and they are much more likely to join my request to reopen removal proceedings. This is a really good time. And in fact, Just 2 years ago, this would have been literally impossible for 99% of people who might be eligible to reopen their cases today. So when should you do it? It's very fact specific, but it often depends on what the government policies are at that time, and now happens to be a great time if you qualify. So what should you do if you have a deportation order? Or I should rephrase, what would I do if I was representing you in this type of case? What I would do first is a FOIA request. I would submit a Freedom of Information Act request for a copy of your entire file. I'll need to figure out where you received the removal order, literally which city and state. What was the basis for the deportation order? Because there may actually be other avenues to reopen the case without even getting the consent of the Department of Homeland Security. And I would also want to see what other documents are in your file, what derogatory or negative information is in your file, which might affect the chances of a judge granting this request. I also want to see if your case was ever appealed to a higher court, like the Board of Immigration Appeals. Because if it was appealed, we can't submit the motion to reopen to the immigration court. There's a different procedure for doing it if that's the case. So this is very fact specific. I can't give generalized advice until I see your file. Since you've made it this far in this video, I imagine this might be a subject that's very close to your heart or close to somebody who you care about. I understand there's a lot of fear and anxiety, and you're worried about the future. I would just say that take that anxiety and fear and funnel it directly into action. Speak with a lawyer who has experience with these types of issues. If you want to consult with me directly, you could call or message my office. I'm always available to consult with you on these issues. We could see whether or not you are a good candidate for reopening your case and fixing your removal order. And as always, guys, subscribe for more weekly content, and I'll see you next week with another video.